Welcome, everybody. My name is Beth Foster. I'm here with the working group, and tonight will be our third webinar in the series. Tonight, we'll be going over public facilities, economic development, and capital infrastructure. My part will be economic development, and we'll leave the end to address any of your questions. We appreciate your time, and let's go ahead. So for those of you that are attending our webinar series for the first time, this is just a quick summary of how we've approached the draft or recommended draft for the 2045 Comprehensive Plan goals. And the common themes that I think you'll hear tonight, as well as maybe other webinars that we're doing, is that in doing our research and talking to a lot of people in the community, we started to naturally shift away from a polarized environmentalism to integrating the idea and the practices of sustainability throughout the system. We use a shared model. You'll see that in a graphic presentation as well, where we look at the economy, the environment, and society, social, community, and how they work together. As we did our research, it became more and more clear that this is a great way to approach the comprehensive plan and its components. The other theme is that we want to move toward an interactive relationship across all the goals in the comprehensive plan. They all seem to have interrelationships, and we felt that there's a lot of benefits, a lot of efficiencies for those policies to work in tighter coordination where they can. And then refining our focus, aligning our goals with the desired outcomes was a theme. Really looking at the end goal and working backwards, looking for efficiencies, potential efficiencies, and reducing risk. Would like to see an increase in innovation over increasing expenses where that may be possible. So just to drive home those ideas visually, this is a diagram we've been working with. You'll see this in different presentations, but it really helped us coalesce our ideas around looking at sustainability and resiliency from these three perspectives. And then we brought in another perspective which touches on community and society, but we feel it touches all of these components, and that's the idea of public trust. So moving into goal 9 is economic development. In the 2030 plan, it was goal 12. For those of you that are tracking along with our recommendations, we did decide for a variety of reasons to move this to goal 9, and it's titled Sustainable Economic Development. So a couple things that became apparent as we did our research as a working group. We were traditionally applying sustainability and resilience, and as many communities and larger groups are applying it to environment. And the question we asked ourselves and other people have been asking themselves is, can we apply these concepts to economic development and planning? And from our research and talking to people, we heard a resounding yes, that this seems to be the direction we're moving toward. The definition of sustainability, which in prior webinars we've discussed, is the focus on the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So that's one definition. There are more involved definitions, but we certainly can take that sentiment and apply that to economic planning in many domains. Similarly, resilience, can we apply that concept to economic policies? And again, we see a resounding yes. This is the ability and the expediency that the environment, economy, or community could right itself in some sort of disaster, disruption. And so areas in economic development that you might start thinking about sustainability and resilience would be financial and fiscal planning. So long-term financial planning, fiscal annual planning, certainly things like infrastructure. We're going to touch on some of that tonight. Business compatibility, how that functions within the economic ecosystem, employment and what makes up different types of employment and consumer demand. And then we get into the more softer issues, but certainly just as important: quality of life, leisure, our enjoyment of natural beauty, the protection of the natural environment, and even, city services. And that's just to name a few. So moving into the background and our data analysis, the broader economic trends we noticed when we started looking at, can we apply sustainable ideas to the economy? We were seeing across the board, no matter what domain we were each researching, we really started to see these coalesce into common beliefs and common values. One is that there's growing sustainable value system across all demographics. I mean, think in the past, this might have been isolated or thought to be isolated with millennials or younger generation, and different ethnic and all different demographics. So any way you slice and dice it, this seems to be happening across all demographics, and there's more and more sustainable consumers that are becoming conscientious about what they're buying and where their money goes. There's a shift away from industrial economic policy. In the past, that was called chasing smokestacks, chasing manufacturing companies, because they in the past were big employers. They were bringing a lot of jobs and really the backbone of a community. Nowadays, it's more like a server farm running a bunch of servers, which does not have a lot of employees. Perhaps an Amazon distribution center or office headquarters. More recently, these have proven to be costly for taxpayers in the long run due to infrastructure and related issues. And a lot of times they're counterintuitively, they're unlikely to produce sustainable net revenue after all the costs are factored in. Another trend is, and I know everybody's seen this, especially this last year with, I was just talking to my husband about Zoom has become a common household word. So we know there's a growing digital economy. There's greater tools for self-employment locally and globally. This just continues to boggle my mind. More people are doing things that you never thought you would do on a Zoom call. So we're getting very creative and very adaptive with the digital economy. Remote work related to that, and this has been going on behind the scenes for quite a while, people being able in technology to work remotely. But I think with this last year, it's evident that it's been discovered, and the ability to work from home lowers the cost for businesses, hiring, relocating, office space, employee travel. That's a significant savings for companies where they can use remote employment. This is also driving a really interesting changes in migration patterns of all ages as well. Now that people are realizing they can live where they want to live. And part of the driving force behind it is also, is it affordable, and how well is the community run? So they're looking at, not just schools anymore, but where do I want to live? And then lastly, a big trend is local entrepreneurship. We've seen a shift away from people that had worked and gotten their original careers in big business, and now they're able and have the skills to transfer that over to their own companies. So drilling down a little bit more into the specifics, those were some of the bigger trends, and of course there are many more, but specifically when we started peeling back the onion and looking at the 2030 comprehensive plan, we saw some not so obvious assumptions. And this is not surprising, because when these are written, a lot has changed in 10, 20 years. We felt that it was a good time to reevaluate these assumptions and spell them out. Do they apply to our coastal city here and now? Are they producing the desired economic outcomes equitably for citizens? And are they looking at all costs, short, long term? So basically, are they doing what we need them to do as a community? And now's a good time to really test that out. Other questions that you can't help asking when you start thinking about economic development in the 21st century is, what is a healthy economy? And how do we measure that for a community like Fernandina Beach? How can the city, on behalf of its citizens, influence that healthy economy, and what's our role in that? How involved should we be? What kind of employment is good for the city, and what kind of business is good for the area? And then how do we define good for the city? Is it narrowly in terms of what increases property tax, or should we take a broader view and look at all economic contributors? So an example of an assumption that we revisited, and this kind of came up we became very quickly aware that newer research is indicating that there's not a trade-off between sustainable business practices and employment and growth. In the past thinking was very dualistic. It was, and this may have been true. This, when this was tested, many years ago, any money spent at protecting the environment, it seemed to affect the growth of the economy and employment. Because of some of the trends we're seeing, particularly, consumers becoming very much sustainably oriented, we're seeing that this does not work this way anymore. Rather, the economy can go up when we pay attention to our environment. And that's good news, because we need to do that now. So what could sustainability and resiliency look like for Fernandina Beach, their economic development? And this is just a few ideas. This is just, the very beginning. But sustaining the city island includes working toward fiscal stability and weathering that whether it's a boom or a bust cycle. So being a little bit more resilient to what's going on economically and focusing on financial stability. Equitably matching the needs and wants of citizens with the operational costs of the city and our economic development policies. So we see a real connection between those three things. Not coming up with economic policy that does not have linkages back to costs and the community. Planning for business, employment, and revenue diversity as much as possible. The more diverse that is, the more resilient we are through boom and bust cycles. And of course, I mentioned this, fostering local entrepreneurship and employment of local residents. Economic resilience comes from protecting our natural capital that really created this economy, basically, and it protects our life and our property. We preserve the distinct sense of place that creates a community, which we feel is a strong draw of visitors and residents. And develop and value all economic contributors in the business cycle. So we know there's a vast local network of entrepreneurs, self-employed people, and a remote workforce that are living here, and they may not be recognized as much as we need to understand the organic functioning of the economy. We liked parts of the Strong Towns approach to fiscal planning. It's very much data-driven and bottom-up. It looks at the long term. It's much like budgeting for a household. Those back to basics for the city, we feel, is something that makes sense economically. So again, back to a reinforcing visual graphic, this interrelationship between the operating costs of the city, our economic policies, including whether that be tax, any types of incentives or subsidies, and the citizens' interests. They all need to work together. I included this quote from Strong Towns because I think it really focuses on the priority, keeping our eye on the ball, which is if we focus on a healthy local economy, which includes fiscal and financial stability, job creation and economic growth will naturally flow. The converse of that is that in the past, people have focused on bringing more and more jobs without really knowing, are they adding to the bottom line, or are they adding to the quality of life the way we need them to? So just a reinforcement on Fernandina as our environment as an asset. And then this has been touched on in prior webinars, but ironically, our biggest asset economically is not on the books. It's not accounted for because that's just the way accounting works right now. But we know, most of us know, that the draw for Fernandina is our environmental resources. It contributes to our quality of life and leisure. And as I mentioned before, it offers protection for life and personal property. And then similarly related is our character, which we have a unique identity here. And this contributes to our community, our belonging, and our shared history. Okay, so now we're moving into the specifics, a few more specifics on the economic development plan. When we looked at that, we saw that there were some challenges with coordinating our economic planning with the 2045 comprehensive plan. There's lack of deep insight on the real city economy and the economic levers, missing broad and deep input from community. There's an example in Eugene, Oregon, where the community decided to have a lottery to get their community involved, and they actually paid their citizens to participate on different committees. Then we saw missing insight and support of all economic contributors, and I mentioned that earlier. So we need to get our hands on the data about who are all our economic contributors in Fernandina. There was a lack of persistent long-term financial and revenue planning and forecasting, which would be part of the integration into the comprehensive plan goals. And then missing SMART goal planning, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound goals. So the solution, where to begin, would be, we want to understand all the economic variables and levers that drive a city revenue and expenses, both the short and long term. We want to gather broad and deep input from the community in a variety of ways, understand and develop specific goals for equitably representing all economic contributors, conduct more long-term fiscal planning, and match the incentives up with the city citizen interests. So considering, again, all short and long-term costs and benefits. And these are, if for anybody that wants to look back on the details in this, these are in the following objectives as policies. So a quick summary. More cities recognize the dynamics and want to incorporate sustainable, resilient goals in economic planning. We're seeing this as a kind of a groundswell effort, bottom up, common sense approach to this. The Smart Towns view is using math and working backwards for comprehensive short and long-term fiscal planning, and lots of transparency. Moving to economic stability over time versus boom and bust cycle reactivity. And along those lines, instead of the economic being succumbing to the economic prevailing winds of boom and bust, we want to bring in a citizen directive, so more citizen direction. And then again, economic planning that dovetails with all comprehensive plan goals, whether that be transportation, land development code, capital improvement. There's pieces and parts where all of this touches, and we see that there's great opportunity to bring those together. So I'll just highlight, I'm going to highlight a few of the goals in the economic development plan, but before I go to that, I'll make quick mention that we added a new goal, goal 1, which is public trust, that was in that diagram. This is according to Florida Constitution, that and goes without saying, city government maintain high standards for government accountability. We thought it was a good time to integrate this within the comprehensive plan. And it just focuses on integrity, performance, transparency, communication, and bringing in that citizen participation. So revisioning economic development for a sustainable and resilient community. We had added a few objectives rather. I'm listing all the objectives on this slide. There's 1 through 9, and underneath would be the individual policies. So I encourage you to read them if there's an area that you're specifically interested in. I'm just going to go over these 3 that are highlighted. 1 is brand new. It's ensure leadership. This used to be leadership and intergovernmental coordination. We felt it was really important to dedicate this to defining who's responsible for leading this role. And we detail that in objective 1. Objective 3, integrate economic development in city planning and operations. And 4, identify compatible businesses. So the new objective with objective 1 is ensure leadership. And in prior webinars in public trust, we had talked about a recommendation, the group's recommendation for a chief financial officer. And as such, we set this role, this position up to be the single point of contact for implementing the economic development goal. Our research indicated that this is a leading edge approach to running a city, the city's finances and fiscal planning. In fact, there's a quote here where CFOs were once primarily in charge of the numbers. They are now called on to be strategists with an eye to developing city's economy. So our accounting department is fabulous. A lot of our data online the budget is fabulous. This would be that next step to looking forward and forecasting and planning financially. So just to show what we would be adding in having that finance lead, this is a key link, we think, between the city, the citizen, taxpayers, and economic planning. We're handling all of the jobs of accounting in an excellent way. The CFO would be taking that data and using it to look forward, to plan, to find insights, some analysis, and figuring out how to add value, which hopefully would be that innovation versus costs. If we can find more innovation and manage costs, that would be to all taxpayers' benefit. A new objective is to integrate economic development into city planning. So it may not seem on the surface that this relates, but in fact, it does touch most departments and areas in the city. And we think that if a CFO were hired to lead that, they would be the perfect position to integrate this and integrate planning into all areas of the comprehensive plan objectives, as well as other areas. And both Laurie Hemke and Margaret Kirkland will be touching on that in the next 2 topics. And then finally, we renamed Objective 4. This used to be attracting targeted businesses. So sometime in our history, there was an interest in targeting larger industrial employers. We weren't able to find what that targeted list was. We felt it was a good time to define that and rename that to compatible businesses. And compatible businesses would be well matched to the natural setting and character of the island. So going back to that economic asset of our island, our environment, and our sense of place, we feel that's our primary asset, and we need to preserve that as such. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And I will now hand this over to Laurie Hemke to discuss public facilities.
Good evening, everyone. And Beth, thank you so much for that great presentation and leading us into our next goal, which is public facilities. And again, for those of you who are following from our last comprehensive plan 2030, that was goal 4, and we have moved it to goal 7. So let me click. There we go. So what is public facilities? What is the true definition of public facilities? Well, as we all know, public facilities matters to everyone. It describes our existing facilities, such as the police, the fire, the golf, our airport. It also describes our services, sets the levels of services for our need areas, such as stormwater, potable water, and solid disposal. The good news is that most of our facilities and systems are in good shape. But let's take a look at it again in terms of Fernandina Beach and look at some of the background data that we took a look at. As Beth said, it's always important when we're looking at these goals to keep in mind who we are and what our economy is based on. So we like to think of our quirky town, our small town charm, our physical and cultural nature, as well as our history. And our sense of place is really the foundation of our economy. We also know that we have hazards that we must face because we are a barrier island. And in last week's presentation, we shared with you the Nassau County Vulnerability Assessment Report from April of 2020. And I've included this in this slide presentation because I want you now to look at these hazards in terms of running our island, in terms of our systems and our facilities. In our research, we confirmed that long-term planning with resiliency and sustainability is in view not only in our work, but also in nationwide and other cities. And so there's some questions that we can use as guide when we're thinking about writing our goals and policies for this goal. I just opened up with what good shape we're in, but we also looking at our hazards as well as our good news that we celebrate. We also have to ask what more can be done. We also have to take a look at what data do we have. We know that we have a lot of data, but we also know that we need to analyze that and determine if our systems need to do more in terms of resiliency and sustainability. I was actually fortunate enough to take a class about the city's organization and government operations through Dale Martin, our city manager. It was a 6-week course really going into city operations. And each week we had the opportunity of talking to some of the directors and managers of the different departments. So I can tell you that there is a lot of data and that our directors and managers are really writing some really solid reports. But now what we need to do is to take that data and take a different look at it in terms of not just what happens at the end of a week or a month of a year, but what does that data look like in terms of planning in the future. We also can drill down and talk about how we're connecting with different neighborhoods. So it may be that when we're collecting data, let's just focus on, let's say, the garbage pickup, which we know is a big topic in the area. That are we addressing the needs of all neighborhoods or just a few neighborhoods? And we also want to see how these facilities and systems utilize the expertise of our floodplain chief resilient officer, as well as the chief financial officer that we're recommending. So let's just say that in summary, that we know that our level of preparation needs to be elevated, and that our in-depth long-term planning needs to be in place. And that this comp plan is a great opportunity for us to update our opportunity and to look at how we're integrating with the other objectives and policies. So let me give you just an overview of this current document. So I don't want to read this to you, and I want you to take some time when you can to look at the overarching goal. And just to highlight some of the key phrases is that public facilities is all about not only making but protecting the investments that we have in our systems and our facilities, and that we must annually assess these systems, but also plan for the long term. Let me go over some of the key highlights of the goal. We talked about sustaining sustainable and resilient public facilities. We must optimize our facilities in preparation for hazards, not only for future storms and sea level rise, but for any other disaster that could potentially harm the island. The goal has 17 objectives that cover the 13 key areas of the city business. And again, I'm not going to go over all the 13 objectives, but I do want to highlight just a few. The first is the level of service, and you see that in that first objective that the levels of services have been defined. And what we've added to the level of service is if a standard cannot be met, then no plan or permit can be permitted, and that would apply to all types of developments, whether it be a new development or a redevelopment. We also want to closely assess all plans from the city and the county to determine if we have adequate facilities and systems. Let's talk a bit about a wastewater treatment. We also want to enforce that the current policy addresses maintenance of septic tanks. As a matter of fact, we went so far as to say no new septic tanks. Now, I'll also add that the septic tank issue is one that's being recognized in the state of Florida. So the governor has actually put aside money to address septic tanks. And there's also bills in both the Senate and in the House, the Florida Senate and House, to address septic tanks. We talk about coordinating with other agencies, and you're going to hear this a lot in our next segment, but we know that with septic tanks and our wastewater treatment centers that we are an island, and that we must work together with the other agents to ensure that we have clean water. We're proud of the fact that Amelia Island is sitting at the high point of the Florida aquifer. But we also know, having that knowledge in 2021, that we must protect this aquifer from contamination and ensure high quality system. The sources and services must be in place before the county or city gives permits, as I referenced before. Policies must be in place that protect this area, and that includes educating our residents and our visitors. It talks about, we've added language to address the use of impervious materials, reinforcing what was the language that was already in place in the 2030 plan. We also talked about, even with our landscaping, but again, reinforcing what was in the 2030 plan, that residents and commercial businesses and commercial properties must use 75% of native plants and also drought tolerant plants. And of course, recycling, we all know, is an issue not only for here, but also elsewhere around the country. We also wanted to talk about some policies in terms of the airport, the fire safety plan. There are plans for both of these, as well as the marina, and so we're suggesting that for the ease of public information, that these be included in the comprehensive plan. We've written policies that talk about the airport, and that it's important that the airport manage noise and activity levels so that all citizens, both the city and county, continue to feel that the airport is supportive of our quality of life. We've added some policies, excuse me, I got quick fingers there, for the harbor marina, recognizing that the city is working with the public and surveys and feedback to ensure that the marina is in good working condition and supports our community. And lastly, language about the golf course. Again, it's a wonderful place that really highlights our unique location. It's attractive. So how can we utilize that as a way to develop an eco-friendly golf course? Maybe even include, not maybe, but including adding some more trees. We also added a new objective that's talking about events on the public land. We know that our events really are a great quality of our life and our character. So when I talked earlier about our quirky nature, that talks about our shrimp festival, our New Year's Eve celebration with the shrimp dropping around the marina. Even so, we know that there must be very close deliberations and decisions when we're looking at events. Some of the elements that we think the committee should take a look at are noise, transportation, parking, traffic, evacuation, and the impact on all neighborhoods, again, both city and county neighborhoods. We know that there's a committee, and we're suggesting that the committee consists of safety leaders, our fire chief, someone from the police department, and also that that the committee have 2 citizens as standing members. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret, who's going to talk about capital improvements.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, so capital improvements are public facilities that provide, improve, or replace other public facilities. They might be constructed or purchased, and they could be existing facilities that need to be upgraded, or they could be projected needs as a result of planning. So they're typically large scale and high cost. In Fernandina Beach, the line of demarcation is $25,000. Doesn't seem like a whole lot, but anyway. So why are they important? Because they impact the infrastructure, the functionality of the city. In other words, we look at the marina, for example, and we see the impact that has had on traffic moving up and down the intercoastal and along our coast, and how that has impacted business downtown. So these are important points. We think about sustainability and resilience. Our beach walkovers and drive-overs are issues that we need to have taken care of regularly, and those impact our environmental sustainability and resilience, and also our economic sustainability and resilience. Often these things come up in multiples, and we know we have a whole list of them right now that need to be dealt with. They also are not always under our control. The marina issues, for example, began with a hurricane. So all of this makes for a bit of a heavy load with a city this size. So our goal 11 capital improvements our goal is what you see here. So you can take a moment to read that. The only part that we have changed is adding the underlined phrase to strengthen sustainability and resilience of our island. The rest is in the current plan. The objectives that are in this section, we have added 2. The first one, leadership. The last one, intergovernmental coordination. I have also underlined fiscal resources, simply because that includes planning elements that we will talk about. So we'll talk about planning, leadership, sustainability, and resilience, and intergovernmental coordination. Both Beth and Lori have talked a bit about planning. We currently have annual and 5-year planning, but we don't have 20-year planning. So that is something that we see a definite need for, not only in terms of the economy and in terms of our public facilities, but also in terms of our capital improvements. And this morning I had a conversation with Thad Crow in the county, who was talking about 40, 45 and either more remote perspectives for long-term planning. We need thorough processes and standards for this planning and very careful scheduling. In this long-term planning, we need to make sure that we incorporate knowledge about the capacities of this small island. We have very little of this data at this point in time. We need to make sure that we incorporate information about sustainability and resilience. And those are all critically important for having the most successful long-term planning possible. Beth talked about leadership significantly, and we also talked about our chief financial officer that we're proposing in public trust, because we think it is a position that can offer a lot in that regard. So this, in terms of capital improvement, this person would be responsible for developing, implementing, and reviewing our plans, also responsible for making sure that the criteria and the prioritization are in line with our physical environment, our fiscal resources, the current knowledge in the field, and values and priorities of our community. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to go into this, this particular type of planning, with what we hope will be a fiscal advisory board and further public input, the floodplain manager and chief resilience officer, department directors, the city manager, and the city commission. We also feel it's critical for this person to coordinate with the county leadership. We are on one very small barrier island, and we need to have our fiscal ducks aligned. In terms of sustainability and resilience, I'm just going to mention a couple of examples of where we've integrated this. The levels of service standards for capital improvements are listed here, and we've added to that, just as we've added almost everywhere, environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Of course, standards for this need to be defined, but this is the first step. Also, in terms of requirements for issuance of development orders, those need to, of course, be aligned with the comprehensive plan, the land development code, and the availability of the public facilities that Lori spoke about. But also, we need to make sure that we have a thorough understanding of the potential impact on sustainability and resilience for each of those. Intergovernmental coordination is very important, not only for meeting standards, but also for identifying expertise, resources, contacts, funding for these improvements. The alignment with the county needs to be strong to support capital improvements, and the economic and fiscal coordination with the county needs to be strong. If we do that, we can find efficiencies in our planning and our finances. I know that the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee is discussing trying to work with the county on island-wide recreation facilities, and that would be a step in the right direction. We need to be working with the emergency management director, both in terms of evacuation times and facilities for evacuation. And we've learned in this process that populations are not part of, and road conditions are not necessarily part of the planning. So that needs to be further research. And of course, periodically the interlocal agreement with the school system needs to be upgraded, because we cannot develop beyond what the school system can support. The recurrent themes that you've heard this evening and in our other webinars are a focus on environmental, economic, and social sustainability and resilience, public trust, leadership, long-term planning, and intergovernmental coordination. Next week, we'll be hearing more of that in regard to housing, in regard to transportation, which is now known as mobility, and in regard to future land use. So we hope you'll join us for that. Right now, Christian's going to open it up for discussion and questions, and we look forward to your input and feedback. Thank you.